much like lucid dreaming would accelerate the seeing ability for people, is, when we're thinning the veil, it gets easier and easier to be able to do that. Somebody had made a comment on the Facebook page that, well, if you just did lucid dreaming, you'd open your third eye and blah, 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 which is true. But, yeah, but I mean, even being able to lucid dream, there's a period of time it takes to actually do it in a controlled fashion. It's not just like, oh, I can lucid dream, a couple times a month, and I'm, a couple times a month, you're going to be, that's great, but you're going to be working on it for a few years before you actually have a really good amount of control to be able to open your third eye. I mean, yes, it does have some effect there. I'm not saying it's completely null and void, but it's really the controlled aspect. I mean, think about it. Lucid dreaming means that you have your conscious mind, the one that you're working with right now while we're doing this video, on, in your dream state. So if you can even hold your dream state there, the whole thing is that you still need to be able to work within that. It's not an automatic process. You've got to then be able to, work through your seeing abilities, while you're there, and be able to control that while you're doing it, turn it on and off, and tell yourself, or ask yourself those questions, not just like one of the things that I discovered while doing that was that, it's really important to ask yourself, as with all things, the right questions, right? So it's not just like, what does it look like to see? It's more like, what does it look like to see when I'm, on this one, on the, the physical reality side. So it's not just like, what does it look like to see in the, lucid dream state? What does it look like? What does it feel like? How can I do it? What are the sensations physically that I'm going to be able to lock in and anchor to bring me to that state in working in physical reality? So those things are really important. So it's like when I was working on trying to, really intensify my lucid dreaming ability to be able to get in and out was a huge thing, right? Because that's where most people get tripped up. So it's like, one of the key things for me was, when I was stable outside, it was like I would sacrifice nights of fun for going, being able to, over time, see how many times I could get in and out of that state in an evening, so it was like, what does it feel like to sort of like really feel the transition between, getting in and getting back, and then getting out and then getting back again, getting out, and what were the sensations like, so that I could really track it and get it very, very comfortable and familiar. When it's comfortable and familiar, it's really easy to get in and out after that at will. So, but those are the kinds of things. So it's like, it's still a certain amount of training. I mean, for me, it's, and I do agree with those people. If that's your bailiwick, then that's okay. If you just, randomly or doing it on a regular basis where you're kind of getting in and out and you can do it a couple times a week or something like that, that's all awesome. But for us, at least for myself, it's like, that's not good enough. I need to be able to do it at will whenever. And, and the goal, a goal for me, for lucid dreaming, is to never lose consciousness from this state to the lucid dreaming state back to this state again. So it's like, you never, it's like when I go to bed, my body can go to sleep, but I'm doing a wild so that I never actually lose consciousness of that, getting out, being out there for the night, coming back and being, back in my normal, the same consciousness traversing both sides, never really losing context with that. So basically, that sounds fantastical, but basically it means sort of leaving your, making the veil between your conscious mind and your subconscious mind, close to being open to each other all the time, so, that's the goal, right? To never lose consciousness. A lot of the old lamas and monks that, Buddhist or Taoist or whatever, that's sort of their goal when they do the, dream yoga and stuff like that, is to never lose consciousness. That's literally their goal, is to be able to be mentally awake and aware constantly, day and night, so that they're just moving from one lucid dream to the next. So, I mean, that's kind of our idea too. It takes some time to transfer what you've done in a lucid state to the physical reality, but there really is no difference. It's just a matter of doing it so much and so frequently that it just transfers normally. So, when it starts to happen, it's almost like, in the beginning, it's surprising that it's happening. It's surprising that you're able to do certain things that were always in a lucid state. You could do it in the physical reality, until it gets to the point where it's like, you can't imagine not being able to do it here, as opposed to only doing it in a lucid dream. So that's sort of those, that's sort of those parts that you're, sort of moving into. And I think that this is another step toward that, if people can learn to sort of engage not only an open focus meditation where they're moving into the infinite potential, but also from this stage where they're moving into it with actually almost a more lucid state, if that's even possible. If it's hard to articulate, but that's what it feels like, because your energetic senses come online, right? So it's like, it's not like you're physically seeing, but you're seeing in a way that's beyond your normal physical sight, right? And so by combining those two things together, when you're back here, it's like there's some crossover there. So, being able to see energy is a hell of a lot easier, because you really have an intimate understanding of what that's like on, from this other, let's say a higher brainwave pattern. So, because you end up, when you do it correctly, you end up getting into like a gamma state of brainwaves. So, which is, super high beta or beyond that, so it's and the people that do this, when they've measured them, they're like, an outstanding scientific outcome would be 2 to 3 standard deviations above the norm, right? So, and people that have been practicing this and doing it, it's like they're getting from, anywhere from in the high 20s to even a couple hundred, derivations above the norm. So it's like, that's unheard of. Like, that's where they track these monks that can stay in gamma all day long, whether they're talking, walking, doing whatever. I mean, that's in that range where they're just never out of gamma. So that's pretty incredible to be able to practice a technique that will do that and get you into that place and get you more and more familiar with it, so that, it just becomes the norm for you. You still need to be able to function there, but I think over time, and being acclimated to it, it gets easier and easier, because, from our standpoint, it's like, that's when your external environment is absolutely being projected by your interior environment. So, and so everything sort of lines up for that. So anyway, that's the news for a couple weeks.
Hey, can you give an example of like what, like one of those things that you said, like the not being able to imagine, or not being able to do some of the things you do in the dream here, what would be like an example of that? I mean, I know we can all like imagine, you allow our imaginations to kind of run free, but like, what kinds of things come to mind when you think about that?
Well, I think it depends. For me, it was things that it's almost like when you do it enough in a lucid state, in a lucid dream state, you kind of take it for granted, like you would take for granted, putting on your shoes or your clothes and going to work, here, physical, it's like something you just kind of like go, oh, I got to get dressed and go to work. And you just do it, and you don't think about it. It's like, you don't think about, oh, and put on my shirt like this and button it like this. And, every step where, like, as a child, right, we do that, like tying our shoes is my favorite example, right? So, and similar in a lucid dream, since we're not children, it's sort of like, but we are children there, with being able to do certain abilities that they're so close at hand, and being able to stabilize our mental state and our awareness in that place, because it's so fantastical that, of course, we're going to even in a good way, kind of freak out when you get there for an extended period of time, right? Because it's so fantastical, and the colors are so vivid and so saturated, to use an artist term, which is the best term that I've come up with so far for that. Because can you see colors that that you haven't seen here? I remember for the longest time they would say no, but I would say that you can. But how are you going to articulate that when nobody else has seen them? Or if other people have seen them, how are you going to, you'd have to be in that same state and point them out, right? Because it's all about resonance. Where are you in training to? What territory are you in training to at the time? So for me, the first place where that sort of shows up is seeing, right? Because it's all of a sudden without trying, you notice that it's coming up for you. You just have the idea that you're going to see. Because after a while, when you do it in a lucid state, in a lucid dream, you just have the idea that you want to do that, and it pops out, right? So it's like it's there already. And as you focus on it, it comes up even more, right? And so it's your intent and your, clear intent, of what you want, which we would call will for the most part, because it's a relaxed focus on what it is that we're trying to achieve. So when we do that, that tends to come up more. And so you find that without really trying, you kind of slip into it here. I mean, your training part may even be the same, but all of a sudden, you hit like a nice biorhythm at a certain point on a certain day, and you're looking at somebody, and all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, something must be going on with them. I wonder what's going on. Even the idea of saying, I wonder what's going on, might actually produce, seeing that auric effect, because it's giving you more information about what's happening with that person than it would be just waiting for them to answer your questions, or even interrogating them about what's happening. It's like, I mean, how many friends do you have, or friendly acquaintances that you have, say, hey, what's going on with you? You seem a little out of it or whatever. And they'll be like, oh, nothing, no problem, whatever. It's like, oh, well, if you're, you can press them, but sometimes that just makes them clam up even more. If I could get more information, even without them sort of really knowing what's going on, then it's like, okay, it's like, I can see that it's okay. It's all right. Everything's sort of, they're a little jangled, but everything's settled, so it's like nothing over the top. But I can also see if something's really eating at them, or something's really made them, incoherent, basically. And for us, incoherent means something completely different than it does for most people, right? They just think it, for most people, incoherent means that you don't understand the words that they're saying, right? And so for us, incoherent means the incoherency in their resonance, which we can see. So it's like things are jangled, basically. That's just my own, mundane term for it. It's like things aren't smooth, things aren't flowing, nicely, things aren't spinning nicely. It looks like it's out of sync, or something's not quite moving together. There's no synchronicity to it.
Brian, that's such a cool way of describing it, because like, I think we can all feel that, even if we haven't seen somebody's field, or we can't see to the level that you're talking about. It's like, we know what that feels like.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's very clear to us. And for us, so what's my, it's one thing to gather the information, but it's just sort of like, to me, just gathering the information on somebody is it's akin to almost like engaging in my own internal gossip, right? It's like, I just want to know what's going on with them, which kind of sucks, It's like, in the end, because really my whole thing should be, if this is somebody that's close to me, or even just somebody on the street that you feel like you'd like to help them out. You just have we all have those feelings about like, oh, it's, this person's suffering. I wish I could help them. It's like, well, you can, once you get, to a point where you're comfortable with it, and you've done it with yourself a number of times. Obviously you want to do that first, so you know what kind of effect there might be. But, because I'm a big advocate of that. It's like, work on yourself first before you try this on somebody else, because you need to know the parameters that you're working in. It's really, I just feel that a lot of these other trainings, although they're, the majority of the stuff is good, it's like they push people into service too quickly, without really demanding that they really work on themselves for a number of years before they ever start trying to work on people. So because you just don't have enough, you don't have enough experience to just, run out and try to treat somebody, with whatever, combination of energy medicine and pop psychology you've attained, so it's sort of like, okay, so, what can we do once we realize that? And once we've, trained ourselves to understand, it's like you entrain to them and then stabilize yourself. And in stabilizing yourself, you're going to stabilize them. It's not like you're trying to, you don't want to go to their depths, but that's the idea, right? It's like you're projecting, you're bringing yourself to a very calm state. And by being in close proximity to them and keeping that intensity there, remember the axiom is, everything entrains to the strongest frequency in the immediate environment. I always say the room, but we can stretch that out a little bit, right? That's why walking in nature is so important for us and so important for everyone, right? And again, doesn't matter if it's an arboretum that's been artificially constructed or whatever. Believe me, nature takes over. Okay, you can plant the trees and the bushes and put the stones in the right place and make it all look kind of natural or fun or whatever you want, but nature takes over. When you walk away, nature is providing a resonance that is extremely balancing. It balances itself, right? Weeds come up in certain places, they cut them down. Weeds come up in some other places, they cut them down. They put other plants and they manicure all this stuff, but it's still nature, right? Nature comes through, the resonance comes through. And so that's why, a lot of us are, considered, not just caretakers, but gardeners, right? It's like we take care of, we're stewards of our property. We take care of this stuff because, we're trying to work with nature. We don't let things just overgrow, but it has that semblance of, when I work on my property, it's like I'm manicuring the energy of the property. That's what I'm trying to do, and so in doing that, certain things that I think are beautiful, I leave, that I think are just like, that's a good thing. It's a dead tree. I should take it down, but it's good for where it is. And that gives you can't just have, this, nature it's perfect, but it doesn't mean that in its perfection, it doesn't mean that there aren't places that are craggy and dark and they serve a purpose, right? You got to have a balance, right? And so nature balances things in a fantastic way and much better than we could ever do. So we're always trying to mimic that as much as possible. The Japanese have taken this to a high art, right? With bonsai and stone gardens and all of these things which represent that balance in nature, shifting a single stone in a stream to make the sound more harmonic to them. And all of that stuff is just, they've taken it to a high art.
So I have a question, you're talking about that, your space and what you do even on your property. Mm-hmm. How about, and I have this has happened to me quite often, but things show up. Mm-hmm. And I don't always know why, mm-hmm. but I end up finding out why. Sure. I've had plants show up like just once, don't know where it came from, right? Worked with it, it's never shown up again. Or mm-hmm. I'll start looking at, I'll see something somewhere. I covet weeds a lot, other people's weeds.
Yeah, sure.
And then they show up on my property. Mm-hmm. Never had them for 25 years, and right. The next day they're there. So is that same kind of what you're talking about in the?
It is.
Finding that balance, because I'm a training myself.
You're sending the signal out that you're seeking balance in a certain aspect of your life or whatever, and then nature's going, you know, we've heard from you before. Okay. You know, and you start getting this relationship and all of a sudden it's like, you know, it doesn't take anything for nature to manifest, you know, a certain weed or a seed to get into your ground at certain times and then say, here you go. This is what you were looking for. Let's check it out and see if that will do it. And then if not, oh, okay. Or that was balanced. That's done. We don't need to keep it going there. You know, it's like, and put something else there instead. So yeah, it's exactly like that. It's exactly like that. It's like the more that we become sensitive, the more that we entrain to, you know, let's say nature as our model of balance and in all of its, you know, all of its connotations, right? It's not just, you know, it's not a golf course, right? It's not a terrarium, right? It's like, there are, you know, there are rocky spots, you know, and there are watery spots, and there are watery spots that are a little on the, you know, stagnant side, and there are, you know, other ones that are flowing. And so again, you know, we're trying to look at that and see that. And it's like, it's one of those things that, like, if you, just as a random exercise, and I'm not expecting you to do this, but if you have some free time, it might be something to be, you know, try and, you know, work out, because it's a fun exercise to do. Like if you take the practice of the presence of God, right? So the relaxation one, right? Where you're thinning yourself out to almost like, you know, just this thin web micron over, you know, a vast area. And then if you know a territory pretty well, like say you have property, or even let's say you've frequented, you know, a certain place that you just love. You've gone there many times. You really know the territory. You've hiked it. You've gone into the, you know, ocean or the streams or the lakes or whatever. Just, you know, in your mind's eye, go to that place and superimpose your thinned out, you know, cell with body over that territory. So you're superimposing that over the territory as a template, right? And, you know, you can sort of move the configuration around because you're pretty fluid, right? I mean, you're basically gossamer thin at that point. So, you know, it's a nice thing to do. So if you need to, you know, wash out debris or energetic debris or whatever, it's not just the air that can do that, right? If it's more emotionally based, you know, set yourself in a lake, you know, that will help to wash that out, a spring-fed lake that will pull, you know, again, the cold water, right, will pull out and contain, you know, those a little more chaotic energy. Or, you know, like a river that's flowing through you from head to foot, right? So it's washing through your entire very thinned out body and, you know, washing all of that. And just, you know, imagine it, you know, in your mind's eye, that it's like literally entering your head and washing, you know, not just over your body, but through your body, and taking out any energetic debris. You know, it'll never take away the stuff you need, right? It's only going to take away those things that you've identified as being imbalanced or excess. And so, you know, if it's emotional stuff, if it's, you know, anxiety or fear or whatever, you know, it's like, it's pulling those things out and sending them down the water. Remember, you're not polluting. You can't pollute with energy. It doesn't work that way. Okay. It's just excess. We've labeled it negative or positive, but you can't pollute the earth with that. When that pulls out, it's going to be redistributed to whoever needs that, right? It's a charitable act. It's a good thing. Don't worry about like, oh my God, I've had people tell me this on a regular basis, like, oh, I don't want to keep purging into the earth and having it, you know, it's like, why? You know, first of all, it can handle it. Yeah.
Brian, when you say excess, can you explain what you mean by that? Because like, even though like an excess of what?
Mm-hmm. It's just an excess of energy that isn't moving through a specific territory in your body, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, it doesn't matter. It's stagnating the point, sort of like putting up a dam in a certain territory, right? So it's like if I have a stream and all of a sudden it goes dry down, I'm tracking the stream up to see what's been blocked up. Sometimes it's just pesky beavers, right, that have set up a little, you know, dam there, and it's to contain the fish or whatever. So I'm, you know, using a little muscle to break the dam down to get it going. But it's the same thing energetically. It's just like when I think excess, I think that it's like a stagnation. And what does that stagnation do to? Sometimes it's deficient stagnation, right? There's not enough energy going through it, and so it's too slow. And so you need to build up the energy in that channel, and that usually means where there's a deficiency someplace, there's probably excess somewhere else, so it's sort of draining that off. And so that needs to be balanced. Again, without knowing all those specific, nature is your best course of action with that, because the more time you spend in nature, the more. But who thinks that nature's energy resonance is less than their own? Come on. Nobody. Good, because it's not. So, it's okay. So it's like, nature, you're going to entrain. The same principle applies to all of us. You're going to entrain to the strongest resonance in your environment. And you put yourself in those, physical environments that are natural, and you're going to entrain to that. So, if I'm let's say, let me give you an example of two different, like, let's say I'm emotionally distant, like I know it's hard to imagine, but still, it's like, but let's just assume that I'm more like Mr. Spock at this point. Okay. So it's like, I'm just sort of like, I know they're there, but I can't really engage in it. And I'm really uncomfortable with that. I'm much more comfortable as an introvert, which I am, but at the same time, engaging with people is, it's become, an art form for me in some ways. So it's like, so this is the thing, right? So, but if I'm that way, that's going to be sort of like what we would consider kind of a deficient in that mental emotional realm, right? Because I'm not really engaging people on that level. So it's sort of like there's a lull there. I can't really get up enough oomph to get in there and, and not continue as the wallflower. I can't get in there, right? And so what would I do? Well, I'd go to some place that was, emotionally charged. I wouldn't go to a deep lake, cold lake, right? It's just going to pull more of that out of me. If I'm anxiety and fear ridden or like really angry or whatever, that's a perfect place to go. Now that's an excessive amount of that uncontrolled emotion, right? So I'm going to go someplace where it can pull that out of me, right? Because that deep lake, I mean, we even say that about people, right? Oh, there's some deep waters there with that guy. It's like he's got some really deep stuff going on. He seems pretty stable most of the time. He listens, but he speaks when he has something to say, those types of things. But so it's that deepness that's there that we see that undercurrent of, stability there. And so if I'm really excessively over the top emotionally, I would go to some place that was like a deep lake, a cold body of water, right? That would pull that out of me and settle me down and sort of get that balanced in some way, right? And I would make that a regular practice and see that would knock it down. If it was the other, right? If I was just sort of like in the, non-emotional or much less emotional and not responding adequately, that's more of a deficiency. And so when I'm going there, then I'm going to go to something that's sort of like, I'm going to spend more time in some body of water that's moving, right? Because it's going to have activity in it. So like a nice, some river with some rapids, or maybe even start off pretty small because you don't want to overwhelm somebody who's, like emotionally detached, right? So it's like, you don't want to overwhelm them in the beginning. So go to a stream that has some of that, it's like, especially if it's cold water, right? So, and then I'm going to wade in that stream, get up to my ankles, maybe sit on the stones, wear a bathing suit and get, have that sort of moving through me, knowing that, okay, it's gonna sort of enliven me a bit. Listen to the water, engage all of my senses. What does it smell like? What does it taste like? What does it sound like? What does it look like? All of those things will help to bring me, into balance, bring up my emotional stability, bring up my emotional empathy and all of those things that we think about, my emotional IQ basically. And so, and so it just takes that bit of balance and knowing, it's like if things are constantly being, suppressed and, sort of internal, I'm going to go to something that's going to sort of help to bubble that to the surface as an active event. If it's something that's already raging out of me and it's hard to control, then that's an excess. And I'm going to go someplace where it can settle and pull it down and sort of balance out that emotional emotional equilibrium from that way. And water goes to the emotions. So that's the element that it's not the only element that you could use, but it's the one that's the most akin to the emotional state. So it will, because it's not likely that you're going to find a stream, in the middle of a desert, right? So it's like, it's going to have an environment around it that's going to balance out that stream, right? So that's the idea. So the rest of it will help to keep everything else in equilibrium while it does that, right? It's not a stream that's tearing up the landscape while it's going through it, right? It's a settled kind of thing. It's part of the landscape. So it's part of the whole territory energetically that's balanced there. And this is just one way that we can utilize nature to sort of help ourselves. And then when we really have a good handle on it, how to help other people. I can't even tell you how many people in the course of a week that I'm telling them to go take a walk, even, we have a couple of parks here close to the lake that are, the trails are actually paved, so people can either ride their bikes or just walk comfortably. They don't have to get into the bush or whatever. And so, but even walking on that, just having that, the canopy of trees and all the vegetation in the lake right there and all of that, and they can walk literally for miles, some of these trails, right? And so they can just comfortably walk. It doesn't matter how, incapable you are of, you don't have to climb a mountain to do this. It's literally practically a flat path that they're walking through, but it has that super balancing effect as they go into it, right? And especially if they give themselves one little indication. So I'll just, without going really deep into it, I'm just going to say, ask yourself the question before you enter it. Say, I'm going to enter this place that's going to balance me in whatever way that I need. What's your most burning question about this situation that you're going through at this time? Just ask the question of yourself, your subconscious, because it knows everything you're talking about, and then walk. Don't think about the question. Don't mull it over and over and over again. You just ask it and let it go. We call that state contemplation, right? As opposed to meditation, which is focused intent on a certain thing, right? So contemplation is basically the third or fourth stage of analysis, right? When we analyze something magically or energetically, that's what we're doing. And so you can use it by itself for this technique. Ask yourself the question, then let it go and just walk and enjoy the beauty of whatever. Listen, intently, watch, do your gazing while you're walking, feel your breath moving in and out. It's like just immerse yourself in that. The more relaxed you are and the more you move through that, remember, a relaxed state will help you entrain in a much quicker way to those things. It's just like, getting some kind of energetic training. I mean, if energetic, I'm rambling, getting some kind of treatment energetically, right? So it's like, if you're, imagine doing, like, if you're doing a shamanic thing or whatever, imagine the person like stiff as a board waiting for something to happen, or just like so jammed up. It's like, how much entrainment are they going to get from you or from the area or from whatever the hell you're using as a technique, or even the implements that you have there, right? It's got to be more relaxed. Hence, if you're using a four winds technique, it's going to be like, relaxing the points and, getting them to relax. Acupuncture is the same. Massage is the same. All of these techniques, they're based on the person getting into a relaxed enough state that they can entrain to the new pattern, right? And then how subtle it is basically is how long it will stay there.